All right, I'm back with part 4, for me, of this review for CzechRaizor. This is actually the second part of the video that he sent me, but that does not matter for you. We'll continue moving forward.
6-7 off should be fold, and I would not open once it's folded to me. Same for king 6, king 10. It's gonna be close. I would open this in hijack, cut off, but this position is kind of close again. I'd probably go open king 10 off, king jack suit, king jack off, king queen off is a definite open, very clear open, but this is borderline, and yeah, opening this in hijack and cut off.
I generally agree with that. You can maybe go low jack if you feel like it, depending on the table, but with these stack sizes, I agree, you probably want to be a little bit more snug.
So this,
however, if you think these players are not going to be jamming you very often, notice in that spot, if you are, say, hijack or low jack seat, a lot of the players yet to act have shoving stacks. So quite often it's fine to raise if you think only the big blind is going to call a lot of the time and everyone else is going to be somewhat straightforward. But if you think they're going to be jamming on you aggressively, then you probably just want to fold.
point the blinds are 125 and 250, and we got just over 30 big blinds. So strategy should change a little bit, as we are not as deep and my implied orders are not as good, and I should not be getting myself engaged with too many speculative hands. King 9 off, let's see what happens.
Interesting, this guy's limping now. So he has a raising range and a limping range, and I would be very interested to see if that's changing because of stack size, because of his hand value, because of his hand strength. It's tough to know exactly what's going on when people have a limping range and a raising range, but I think I would just check this. This hand flops pretty well. You really don't want to get check shoved or limp shoved, so I would just check.
Once the small blind completes, I think both options are reasonable. I can check and I can make it around 3x with king blocker, and I would prefer, I think king 9 suits it as a definite check. King 10 off is a definite check because it is a good hand. It's strong enough to see the flop and not the best spot to be 3-bet. King 9 is kind of, I think king 7 should be good candidate to make it 3.5x and to get some fold equity. King 9 is somewhere in the middle, and I'm not 100% sure what's the best option. V is quite an aggressive opponent who steals 19% from small blind. He opens 19% of heads.
Oh, maybe I was wrong about this. Oh, okay. I was wrong about this in the previous section. I said the guy had 58% steal. Okay, so I had the stats wrong. That's his flop C-bet. Yeah, okay, so going back to the previous video, I would not have shoved, assuming it was 19% steal, but I would have shoved with queen jack if it was a 58% steal. So I like your play much better now with the queen jack hand. With this hand, now he's most likely limping with a lot of garbage and just raising his best hands. If that's the case, you could easily raise king 9, but it's not like you're raising it because it has a blocker. You're raising it more so just because it's a good value hand, and you're trying to get more money in the pot pre-flop, and you're trying to let it play out a little bit better for you after the flop where your opponent's going to check fold instead of perhaps blindly leading on a lot of flops. So I think in this spot, I would just check, but I'm okay with just checking here. As your opponent's raising less often and limping more, you can start raising more hands like this for value. But I just like checking. I mean, I am okay with the small blind limping. I'd much rather, I mean, I guess I'd rather them fold, but it's not really bad when they let you just check a lot of hands from the big blind. I tend to raise much more polarized in this spot versus most players that I play against, but maybe in this game, it's fine to raise a very linear range of just good hands. And I think this probably falls near the bottom of that linear good hand value raising range if you feel like raising it.
So, yeah, I think it's very close. I'm not quite sure. This flop, obviously, I'm at the very top of my range. Unless I had like king 3, king 7, and 3-7, which I could have. I'm from big blind. Anyway, see what happens. I have to call at least one, and I think I have to call 2 streets and then make a big decision or make a decision on the river. At this point, I think it could be stabbing with his entire range, so probably like 80-90% of his range, and I have very happy call on the flop. This turn makes it more interesting.
Yeah, like you said, you have a very good hand. I'm not really trying to fold this ever. Also, one thing worth mentioning is that it seems like you do not like to continue when you do not have an obviously strong made hand. And maybe this is just a sort of blind assessment, but I think that, like the pocket twos hand from the previous video where you call big blind then check folded queen 6-6. Right here, if the flop comes 8-7-4, if your opponent bets, you really don't need to be folding very often. Quite often, floating is fine. So I think maybe you need to get a little bit more comfortable sticking around after the flop with junky hands, which, you know, kind of stems from also you saying you want to raise this hand because it has a blocker. But just be aware of that. Think about that as you move forward.
As his value betting range gets narrower, so once he bets, he only value bets king plus. No longer value betting hands like ace-7 or 8s or 9s. Maybe 9s and 10s with one club, but he should not be value betting hands like queen-jack. Well, maybe queen-jack is a borderline one, and I wonder whether he should be value betting queen-jack here. But the point is that his value betting range is narrower. So once he bets, I think he's got some bluffs and one club hand, like 10 plus of clubs. And with this range, I'm still doing okay. So I think I should call one more.
Yeah, definitely call. Do not fold.
Once it's checked to me, I do not see too many reasons in betting. Yes, there are 3 clubs on the board, and another 4th diamond could come off. But I think that he should be, or he would be betting these, at least the higher clubs in his range, in his hand. I'm not sure why I still keep mixing up diamonds and clubs. Okay. So I like checking behind here. I don't think betting is too bad because I could get some value out of my hand. Like I could get calls from Jack X if he decides to check here, which is reasonable. So I'm kind of split whether I should bet or check here.
Well, let's think about it. Are you going to get check raise very often? That becomes the first question, and I would probably assume not. And when you do, I think that you probably have a pretty easy fold. So I don't really mind betting for value / protection in this exact scenario. Yeah, I think betting here is good. I also think checking is fine. The one problem with checking is that you don't really know which river cards are bad for you. I mean, perhaps none of them are bad for you. And if none of them are bad for you, then obviously you'd rather check. But we do not know which rivers are bad for us. So I think we just want to bet here. And I don't think you need to bet big. I think a bet of like 1,000 is pretty nice. It's going to get called by various clubs. Also prices out just random clubs. So I think a bet of that size is pretty good.
And I decided to check in this spot.
Like you say though, I don't think it matters so incredibly much with this hand because we do win at showdown a ton. So yeah.
It was an 8. Once he checks, I think I have to value bet. It's a very clear spot for me to value bet because he could have some Jack X, 8X, 7X. Just too many pair hands that I beat. So it is a clear value bet. This is really interesting. Facing a bet just over half pot, and I'm blocking 9, 10. He could have 7, 8. Once he limped. Could have Jack 8. Jack 8 off, Jack 8 suited. I think he would bet 9, 10 on the turn with a double gut shot. Try to make me fold. Some very likely hands that I go flop with, like 5, 6, 6, 7, or 7x's. Yeah, 5, 6. Maybe even some 3x, like 4, 3, that I decided to go flop ones with. So he's pretty polarized on this river, and I think calling is the better of 2 options.
Yeah, I definitely agree calling is good, especially when you check behind the turn. You have to realize that you're going to induce your opponent to bluff you some portion of the time. And you just cannot justify folding whenever you think your opponent may be bluffing you somewhat wide just because you check behind on the turn. So I definitely like calling here. I think calling's the only play.
Okay.
And notice here that on the turn, when I was discussing betting, this is an example of a hand that very easily could have called a turn bet. And then when you check behind, you allow these hands that may either call a turn bet or just fold on the turn, you allow them the opportunity to easily realize their equity. And if you were to bet the turn, he's not going to check raise you with this, right? He's going to check call or he's going to check fold. And either of those options are fine because he's probably not going to turn this type of hand into a bluff on the river. Same thing goes for like Jack 10, Ace 3, etc. All these hands are just going to check, 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 and only put more money in when they get there. So that's a pretty clear example of at least one hand that I'm very happy to put money in on the turn with.
He rivered the second pair with 7-8, which I guess was one of the likely hands that he held. It's kind of tricky, it's kind of close, because he should not, once he bets checks and then bets the river again, I think he should not be bluffing too often. But I'm at the very top of my range. He could have taken this line with Jack X and decided to value bet check on the river like Ace Jack, Queen Jack, although I would expect him to bet a little bit less with these hands, like closer to half pot, maybe just under half pot. So yeah, it's definitely very interesting. I wonder if I made a mistake calling with this part of my range and with this hand in a small stakes tournament in a spot like this. I remember being in the hand that I was not very happy, and I kind of saw 7-8 suited, but I imagined that he would barrel 9-10, as I do now. So I decided to call, and I wonder what everybody thinks about this spot.
So
Okay,
it seems to me...
Do one more hand and finish the second part, wrap up the part 2.
It seems to me like you're kind of overanalyzing this because you lost this hand. I bet if you did not lose this hand, you would not be thinking anything of it. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with analyzing the losing hands, but just be aware that just because you lost the hand doesn't mean you necessarily played it horribly wrong, right? So I think the most important part about that hand is that when you check behind the turn, you are very rarely planning to fold on any reasonably safe river, and a 7 is a reasonably safe river. Also, you've induced a lot of bluffs, and because you've induced a lot of bluffs, you just cannot justify folding, because you know your opponent's going to continuation bet very wide on the flop, or bet very wide on the flop, and then turn goes check check because he likely doesn't have very much. Down the river, he thinks you may not have a good hand, so he needs to be bluffing with a lot of his air. So that's the spot where I think you just must call. Whenever you pot control, very often you are sort of roped into paying off, and that's okay. Notice there, you got unlucky, you lost a small pot, and it's not the end of the world.
Pocket 6s in small blind, see what happens here. Yeah, it is the same thing, it's the same scenario for me, being very conservative and trying to be very tight from small blind. I would not hate this call, because it's for 450, and I'm getting 6.7 to 1, that's very, very good odds. The big blind is relatively tight, so he should not squeeze or shove too often, or squeeze. I'm not entirely sure what's the best option. I would call pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket 6s thing are close, but I can see myself calling into these guys. And they are very wide, they got wide ranges, which kind of advocates the fold, because they can see but ones and they can miss so many flops, but I can't tell what flops these are, and I will never get to showdown 3-way or 4-way from a small blind. So I think it's close, and I prefer folding and conserving my stack for spots where I think, or I believe, that are more profitable.
So I don't really view this as a close spot. I'm defending this, or calling this, whatever you want to call it, pretty much every time. Mainly because we can easily check raise a lot of flops that give us either equity or a set. And I think here we can put in 450 very cleanly, right? We're getting 5-1 immediate pot odds. So if we get just like another 1,000 chips in the pot, or I guess we need another 2,000 chips in the pot, we're probably going to be profiting. And there are sporadic times that you may not think about, but times that do come up where it goes check, 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 and you end up winning a showdown when everyone has nothing. So I'm definitely going to peel here. You're going to lose the pot a lot of the time, but notice this only 1.5 big blinds, and you are getting pretty good immediate pot odds. So I would definitely call in this scenario.
And I can navigate through as a preferred raiser or aggressor, and I can be a lot more clear about where I'm at these spots. King 5 should fold. Yes.
So you also just mentioned that you want to have a very clear idea of where you are in a lot of these pots, and as you move up again, you're going to have to be more comfortable with not knowing where you stand. Not knowing where you stand is okay. You do not have to know that you have the nuts in order to put money in the pot. And you just have to be generally more comfortable with sticking around and playing a little bit more splashy, even when you do have a somewhat short stack. It's not just only a push or fold game at this point. So that's definitely something I would suggest you work on.
Then we go for king 6. See what happens with pocket deuces in the big blind. I think this is a call for 300 more. Very, very likely that the limpo will complete, and I can see the flop. I would be able to see the flop four way for just 300 chips, and just purely set mine. I would never imagine that I will be able to get to showdown, but just set mining here for 300 chips. I'm quite positive it's the best play.
So I don't view this hand and the previous hand as very different at all. In the previous hand, you're almost never going to get 3-bet. You're effectively closing the action. You're getting slightly worse pot odds, but your hand is slightly better, so you know that accounts for something. So I don't really view this hand and the previous hand as anything different. And I would say, I mean, in the comments, feel free to let me know why you think this hand and the previous hand were different. I mean, maybe you think you're getting squeezed sometimes, but notice this guy's just tight, right? He's not doing anything ridiculous. And the fact that you're in the small blind versus the big blind, I don't think is that relevant whenever you are set mining off a short stack. So yeah, I'd be interested to know why you think these are different, worthy of making this hand from a call into a fold.
And taking very small risk on the off chance that the limper decides to limp re-raise. Missing the flop, hopefully going to check fold, not taking any.
Like right here's an example of a spot where sometimes it just checks down and everyone has Jack 10 or Ace Jack or something like that, and you win the pot. So obviously here you fold, but this is an example of a spot where sometimes it's going to go check, 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 check.
Any stabs to try to steal this flop 4-way. Okay, so I'll wrap up the part 2 with this hand. I'm going to continue next time.